That's right. So, and the biggest effect is in the places that don't have a right to arms in their state constitution. So,
which states would those be?
Well, California, New Jersey, New York would be the key ones. And then in Massachusetts, there actually is a right to arms in the state constitution, but the state Supreme Judicial Court basically nullified it in 1976. So in a practical sense, Massachusetts now gets a right to arms back. It doesn't have nearly as much effect in Colorado or New Mexico or Wyoming or the Dakotas or
a place like Texas, where by law you have to have at least 3 guns on you at all times.
You know, Texas is surprisingly restrictive on gun
really?
control. They have their concealed carry law is a much stricter law than really the national norm.
All right. Going back to this, how big are these pair of cases? We've now have on the federal level, it's an individual right. On a state level, it's an individual right. Is this is it fair to say this is the most important gun ruling in the 235 years of our history?
Absolutely, because the Supreme Court for a long time did think they would sort of mention the Second Amendment often when they were talking about some other issue and use the Second Amendment to make a point about the other issue. And in doing that, the court would always treat the Second Amendment as a meaningful individual right, but then the court for a long time never did anything to enforce that. The court had the same kind of attitude towards the First Amendment for many years. It was we went nearly a century and a half of American independence before the court even started taking the baby steps to actually enforce the First Amendment. And so what the Supreme Court started doing with the First Amendment in the 1930s, they're now beginning to do with the Second Amendment these days. There were lots of, all kinds of, the free exercise of religion clause. There was virtually nothing was held unconstitutional in that for most of our country's history. And then finally in the 1960s, the Supreme Court started getting involved in that in a serious way.
Talk to me a little bit about how this case was when it came about. That you have been working, ever since I've known you, bringing forward legal arguments, academic arguments on the Second Amendment. And there seems to be a core of academic lawyers who have been working on this case for, I would say, 15, 20 years, and you have been a lead attorney in that. And so to see this happen 1 year and then 2 years later another, it's really a vindication of your decades-long work.
Well, thank you. You go back to some of the most senior people in that group. The technical name is the Justice League of America.
No, that's where Superman and Batman hang out.
That is true, but
well, that's the Hall of Justice. I'm sorry, I get confused.
The Hall of, maybe Hall of Justice. No, I think the Justice League is the official name. The Hall of Justice is their office building. But people like Steve Hallbrook have been working on this issue since the late 1970s. I joined in the late 1980s, and I think all what we've done by going back and doing the research about the original meaning of the Second Amendment, bringing these documents forward from the times to show what the original intent was, it helped the courts because, first of all, the Supreme Court justices and their clerks, who are all very smart, but they can't research every issue, so they need some of that base of scholarship. And secondly, we helped move the issue from something where, as of, say, 1978, everybody knew, in the sense that you just talked about, that, oh, it's just a collective right. Now, when everybody knew, it meant if you were an intellectual, an academic, you could sort of sneer at the right without really having much understanding of it. The American people always believed in the Second Amendment as an important individual right, but among the academic and judicial class, they'd sort of forgotten what the amendment meant.
Because the research wasn't done to bring up the documents, the research, what the founders really meant, and to put it into context. Talk to me a little bit about Independence Institute particularly. We put in an amicus brief in both of these cases. What was that, and how did it help? Well,
the Independence Institute filed an amicus brief with our, of course, for the Independence Institute itself, but also for a large coalition of law enforcement organizations. The lead one was the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. They're one of the 2 major groups that trains police officers in how to use guns safely to save their own lives and save the lives of crime victims. And then the other major group that does that also joined the amicus brief. So we had the 2 national organizations of police trainers and lots of other police organizations from around the country on both briefs. And we got cited in Heller 4 times in Justice Breyer's opinion in the recent one, McDonald versus Chicago, we not only got cited twice by Justice Stevens, but got cited by Justice Alito's opinion for the court pretty early on in footnote 2, where we showed the evidence that after the enactment of the handgun ban, Chicago's crime rate relative to the other 24 major cities got much worse almost immediately and has stayed much worse even then. And Professor Carl Moody of William and Mary did a lot of the statistics on this for us. And what he demonstrated was that this really sudden and dramatic change in Chicago's crime rate relative to the other cities, so of course, nationally things are going to go up and down, but Chicago suddenly became much more dangerous than most other cities.
Isn't it amazing that the two crime capitals, murder capitals, become D.C. and Chicago for their reputation, and those cities, and also New York, it's almost impossible to carry a gun?
Well, yeah, and New York is actually substantially safer than either of those. And New York City, even though it's pretty strict on anti-gun laws, never went to the extremes of either of those. They never banned handguns.
Let me bring it to the way that we work at the Independence Institute and why it's different, in that what you've been working on for literally a decade, 15 years plus, and other people, is a slow burn. And that in politics, we always get excited about the race in front of us. Who's going to win this election? Who's going to be the next governor? Who's going to be the next senator? Is this thing going to pass? But the work that we've done on Second Amendment issues, as we've done on education and finances and economics, it has a slow, long window that you didn't know when this day would come when you started this work 15 years ago, but it was important to lay this groundwork, and if you didn't, we wouldn't have had this victory now.
Well, that's right. Think tanks, their most important effect is changing the terms of debate over the long run. You can have the 2010 election between candidate X and candidate Y, but usually the fight between X and Y is going to be within the boundaries that were set by the think tanks and the universities and the other influencers of public opinion in the long term.
That's why it's important to invest in these things, even though it's not the candidate, it's the idea. Candidates come and go, politicians come and go, but the principles stay. And you've done a great job fighting for them.
Well, and the more money people give to the Independence Institute, the more can be spent on the hair treatment that I think the public wants you to be able to have.
I've noticed yours is getting farther and farther back.
It has. Well, it started when I was 17. I considered a strategic retreat to, they gave up indefensible ground.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty incredible. That is probably one of the best wigs I have ever seen in my life. Dave Kopel, thank you again. What an incredible victory these last couple of years. And the gun movement is very grateful. And the civil liberties movement is grateful. And I'm grateful for you watching. Learn more about the Independence Institute. Go to independenceinstitute.org. Check out ivoices.org if you're looking for a good podcast. And by all means, listen for me late nights on 850 KOA. Tell a friend. We'll see you next week.